Hello and welcome to the PERC Coffee Cast, episode 6. I'm your host, Andrew, joined as always by Philip and Alan, co-owners of PERC. This week we're going to talk a little bit about sourcing. So we brought on a special guest, the operations director at PERC, Taylor Kimball. Welcome, Taylor.
Hello. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, and as I mentioned to Addison last week or 2 weeks ago, we kind of just go right into it. So we're going to talk coffee first. That way, anybody who wants to sign out and not hear anything about Taylor can do so. So it's not personal. It's not personal. We treat everyone this way. So Philip, what are we talking about this week? What are we drinking?
This coffee is Columbia Sidra Genius right here in this fun PERC mug for you, designed by our own Brad, the Bad.
And those mugs are available now
on the website right now. Awesome. But wait, don't go there yet.
Wait, there's more.
We got other stuff too.
Those are rotating mugs because I also have a PERC mug that's no longer available. So
that's right. Get them while they last.
Yeah. All right. So, Alan, what was the driving factor behind talking about Sidra Genius this week?
Yeah, it's 2 words: gummy bears. I looked at the bag of this coffee, and seeing the words gummy bears as tasting notes is just ridiculous and awesome and true. Like, it's accurate. This coffee actually tastes like gummy bears, which is ridiculous. So I thought this was a really good way for us to talk about, one, how do we find and choose to source coffees like this, or what what's that overall sourcing process, and then second, how do we get from a coffee like this that's really delicious and putting word like gummy bears on the bag, because that's just such a far departure from kind of the normal coffee words that you see. Gummy bears isn't usually one of those. It's not on the flavor wheel anywhere, but I think it's awesome and describes exactly what this coffee is. So it's a fun way to dive into both of those things.
Just to clarify, as a, foreshadowing a little bit, this is not just ground up gummy bears inside of a coffee bag. This is still coffee beans, right?
It is still just coffee. Yeah.
I feel bad for the grinder that had to grind gummy bears.
I'm not cleaning that one.
Makes an excellent Christmas fruitcake as well. All right. So, Taylor, welcome on to the show. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, personally, professionally? Take us where you want to go on the journey of Taylor.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm Taylor. I've been with PERC for about a decade at this point, which is crazy, because I feel like I just kind of blinked and here I am. It's wild. But yeah, when I first came on, I feel like the sort of landscape of the company was quite different. It was really just Philip roasting on a 12-kilo machine, and me sort of helping him pack up bags of coffee and deliver them. And it sort of transformed, and I kind of was able to step in and learn about the roasting process and just in general learn about kind of the ins and outs of sort of running the operation and what goes into running a small business. And yeah, as we've sort of grown and taken on more wholesale accounts and built out our own shops, the wholesale operation has also grown, and I've kind of stepped into a role more of like the sourcing of the coffees and getting to do the green buying and really like taking those coffees and deciding how we want to roast them and what flavors we want to try and bring out of the coffees and sort of best represent them and let folks try them. And I guess there's another sort of hat that I wear too, of kind of working with our production manager on making sure the whole production operation and everything from like bagging the coffees and like what equipment we want to use and different workflows and things like that. So
from packing to roasting to sourcing, and like kind of helping in the whole operation of the business at this point now.
Yeah. So
But
it's sort
had
of
your hands in all
everything.
of those.
Yeah. It's kind of every step along the way from bringing the coffee into our building, into this room I'm actually sitting in right now, getting them run through the roaster, making sure they taste good, and then from there, our production manager Ryan will take the roasted coffee and make sure that that gets distributed where it needs to go, and everyone's web orders get to them safely and quickly.
So,
Yeah.
so just thinking about kind of your role now, since we're also, our goal here is to talk about sourcing. How do you, I guess kind of an early step in that process, I'm thinking, is figuring out which coffees to
Mhm.
even try. But I mean, I guess there's a step of how do you determine which producers you want to partner with or seek out new partnerships with. I guess that would probably be the first step. And then from there, which coffees to even try from them.
Yeah. And that's a good question, and kind of a constantly changing process, I think. Like there's a lot of producers that we've worked with year over year. The Brazil being one of them, the Legender. I think it's our third year working with that particular coffee. So it's sort of these like trusted relationships where we know the producer, we know the quality is going to be there. We're just kind of continuing that relationship of working with them, and then there's some coffees that we're sourcing more seasonally and just want to try new stuff, and a lot of that is me reaching out to request samples from new folks and just saying, hey, I'm from PERC, and we're looking for this. We need something funky, fruity, wilder flavors. Like what do you have that might fit that? And then starting the relationship that way, where we bring in samples, we'll cup all the samples, we'll put them through the paces, I guess, and yeah. So it's go ahead.
Yeah. So then when you're working with whether it's established or a new producer, like what kind of flavors are you telling them that you're looking for? Is it a set like, hey, we need this type of coffee right now because it's March, or I mean, what's the thought process in determining
Yeah.
flavors?
So I guess to sort of take a step back and talk about the sourcing program as a whole, we have a set of what we call our core coffees, which
Okay.
year over year we always will have a Brazil, a Guatemala, a Colombia, and then a washed and a natural Ethiopia. So we know that year over year we're going to be looking for one of those coffees, and that's a pretty wide range in itself. You have a
Right.
coffee
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm thinking when I just hear Colombia, because the last couple uh, episodes we've kind of discussed that there's a lot of innovation in Colombia, and so
yeah.
that's a
So
wide range.
there's a huge range of all these coffees, but in general, so we like really sweet coffees, just as like a common thread that runs between all of them. But the
Like
Brazil
gummy
kind
bears.
of yeah. But thinking of like the Brazil as sort of the base, sort of like the anchor, I guess, of the core coffees, where it's heavier bodied, chocolatey, kind of lower acidity, generally speaking, all the way to the washed and natural Ethiopias that we like a little more fruit characteristics and a little more acidity to them. Um, so there's kind of a range there that we're looking for year over year. We want to source, and then outside of that core lineup, we have a little bit more room to play with, like other origins, other processes, flavors that we wouldn't typically expect to see from certain origins too. Which stuff like the Sidra Genius is like, I guess, the best example of that, where it's a
Okay.
Colombian coffee that's so bright and fruity and funky. We just we tasted it and we were like, that's got to be one of those
Got to be in the
seasonal
lineup.
coffees.
So
But yeah,
go ahead. You finish your thought.
But of those seasonal coffees,
Sure.
we found that having 3 at a time tends to be a good kind of rotation. So we'll have one that's a bit crazier, fruitier, more vibrant flavors. One that's kind of somewhere in the middle, something that's balanced but has a good bit of acidity and interesting stuff going on, and then one that's maybe a little milder. So
okay, yeah, that's where I was going with that question anyway. So you were reading my mind across the interwebs. Holy moly.
And
I
one
also
thing,
left my podcast tongue at home. I don't remember if that's on the first or second cut, but
that's right. One thing to add to that I think was implied, but the core coffees, we didn't really have an idea of what we're searching for with each of those, like really great examples of what we think of when we think of a Brazil, what we think of when we think of a classic Colombia. So those are how we think of the core coffees. And Taylor touched on when we talk about the seasonal coffees, we're really happy to go find a Colombia that maybe we're like, I can't believe that's a Colombia. It tastes different. So so we can, like, when you go with our core coffees, like even when they get wilder, there's still a like the natural Ethiopia we shoot for, something that's more fruity, that like blueberries or strawberries, because that's kind of what you think of when you think of natural Ethiopia. So that's
it doesn't always have to be like the Brazil Legender doesn't always have to be the Brazil Legender. It might it has been the past few years, but you guys might do you do a tasting kind of every year or every season to make sure that that's the Brazil you want to represent your?
Yeah, absolutely. So even of those core coffees, like if we know we've established this relationship with Legender, we know we like their coffees, we'll still try other Brazils. We'll still try other coffees just to see kind of how that fits in with what else is out there, and just to give some perspective too. So,
Alan, why were you laughing there? What was?
We're not cheating on Legender. We're just seeing what else is out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's totally true. A really really interesting example right now, like today, we just sent out the email about the Ethiopia Rico, which is or Reco. It's a washed Ethiopia that 3 years ago and 2 years ago was the washed Ethiopia in our core lineup. And right now, the Dimtu is our core coffee washed Ethiopia, but the Rico just is a different enough version of what a washed Ethiopia can be, and it's really nice that we're running both. And it's kind of it's really neat to be able to do both things, and I hope people try both of them, because they have some general similarities in flavor profile, but you're not going to mistake one for the other. And yeah, that's what's cool about the seasonals, is it lets us do whatever we find that's interesting.
Also, just to point out too, something Alan sort of mentioned is that we have loose guidelines, but we're always willing to let the coffee and the season and inspiration drive, kind of, to some extent, what if we're all in agreement, hey, this is really great, we got to put this out, or this is neat, this is how this could fit in to what we're doing, or there's a hole in the lineup that this fills. We don't keep it so rigid that we can't follow inspiration and taste great things and have a home for them.
We already have a fruity coffee. It's out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We do not.
Yeah. And too, just, we've tasted so many coffees now, and there's such a range of even what like fruity means. Like there's such a vast range there. So there's a lot of room for different coffees.
Do you want to just come on as host? You're like segueing for me. This is great. No, yeah. The tasting is what I wanted to, kind of where I wanted to go. Like how do you come up with these different terms?
So the flavor, like, you mean the actual flavor notes?
Yeah, sure. Like gummy bears. How is that on the bag?
Honestly,
Who chooses that? There are multiple flavors of gummy bears. That's like putting jelly beans. Is it just I grabbed a handful of gummy bears?
We did not have room on the bag to say which gummy bear, but there was a specific gummy bear.
Okay.
That we
It's
mentioned.
red. It's red, definitely.
It's well, back to your initial question, I guess. The process of determining flavor notes, that kind of happens after we've sourced the coffee. We'll typically say we know we're looking for a seasonal coffee. We'll
Sure.
sample a bunch. We'll pick favorites. We'll think about where they fit in the lineup. If we know we still are lacking a seasonal coffee that's a little bit milder and sweeter, we'll taste for that. Once we pick the coffee, we'll kind of set up a separate brewing of the coffee where we all kind of sit around with the whiteboard and everyone kind of throws out ideas, and it's not really rigid. And I guess we don't stick to the traditional flavor wheel terms a lot of the times. We kind of just throw out whatever we're thinking, and of those we pick a few that we think do the best job of representing the coffee. I think the gummy bears might have been a Philip descriptor, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty free flowing, I guess. There's not really a very set, rigid way that we determine those. And even to back it up, like when we're cupping samples and trying a lot of coffees, we don't tend to even use a really like the set SCA cupping form. We kind of have our own version of that's a little more leaves a little more room for just general thoughts and
not holiness, just like
I guess less
common sense, right? Like just we're talking, and
less of tying a score to it, and more of a like, sure, where would this fit into our lineup? Like, what would folks think of this coffee?
What do we like? Yeah. What don't we like? Really simple. It doesn't have to be so rigid. No one really cares. But or very few people care. Oh, this got a 89. Like,
I also struggle. I struggle a little bit personally with taking notes and tasting and taking a bunch of notes. So if I can do it a little more concise and that helps me, I think.
So it's really hard to be present, sort of.
Mm-hmm. I can see Philip doing what he's doing now, and then he puts the cup down and says "blurple." Or
that's exactly right. And somebody writes it up, and then we have a discussion after where we start eliminating stuff. And we're like, oh, well, these two are similar. Like we got down to, should we do watermelon or gummy bears? It was kind of like one of the two. We don't need to have both of the, or I don't remember what all the terms were.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then there's usually a group of at least three of us that are kind of in that room that 3 or 4. And usually we come to a place where everybody's feeling pretty good about it. I think one of the most important things we try to do is we try to use flavor notes that people will understand. Like if you use really, every once in a while, I'll look at someone's flavor notes and I'll be like, I don't even know what that is. What's that? I have to Google it. And that's the whole, not really the point of flavor notes. It's not to like show off your vast knowledge of fruits and nuts. It's like to communicate to the customer what to expect in the bag. And so that's what we want to do. And I think that like any coffee we bring in, because we're looking at bringing in a pretty wacky in a very different way coffee right now that will definitely be worthy of a podcast if we're able to get it. I'm not sure I liked the coffee, but it was so interesting that I think we have to put it out. And lots of other people liked it. It's a matter of well, these are just flavors, right? It tasted like black licorice.
That is exactly what I was gonna guess.
Right, and I'm just not a black licorice fellow, but there are people that love it. But anyways, so communicating exactly what to expect is important. And like we said, even with that one, I'm like, if we source that one, we just need to be really careful to put flavor notes that are very accurate so that people understand this is a coffee for me, this is not a coffee for me.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think that's important for a lot of reasons. Like one, I mean, we haven't done formal Alan nerdery, A/B testing on the same coffee in different bags of different tasting notes. But watch for that someday. But I think there are certain flavor notes that people maybe just won't buy a coffee, or be less likely to buy it because of what it is, even though that was kind of like a minor flavor to it. But then also back to, I'm going to use the word accessibility again, that we talked about with the Dim2. So we didn't talk about this with the Dim2, but a washed Ethiopia, especially like the Dim2, is one where using like coffee people words might be stone fruit and bergamot for that coffee. And I hate seeing words like that because nobody's like, oh, I'm going to the grocery store. You want me to pick up any more stone fruit? Or, do we need to stock up on bergamot? Like, those just aren't words that people use in the world,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, this tastes like peaches, or this tastes like lavender. This tastes like
and a
Earl
peach
Grey
doesn't
tea.
taste like a cherry. Peaches and
Right.
cherries are very different, but
Right,
they're
yeah.
both stone fruit. What about a
Yeah.
plum or
Totally.
apricot? Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even to the Sidra, we say watermelon, but if we had enough space on the bag, at least for with my experience with this coffee, it's not that it tastes like a fresh cut watermelon on a summer day. It tastes like a watermelon Jolly Rancher. Like that's the
Right.
watermelon we're
Yeah.
talking about.
That was definitely discussed.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't have an infinite amount of space there. But when we have done some other communication around this coffee, I've used exactly those words. Watermelon Jolly Rancher or red.
Start
I don't know if
putting
I even called.
pictures of it.
Yeah.
Put a picture of a watermelon Jolly Rancher on it, and then a picture of a
Yeah.
red
Well,
gummy
there's
bear. If you like this,
We also don't want to be in any lawsuits. If
well, not
we can
Jolly
help it.
Rancher specifically, right? It's like Holly Ranchers or whatever the off-brand is.
Jolly farmer.
There's also with coffees like the Sidra, like anaerobic natural Colombias, there's also always like this really dark chocolatey thing going on, but we've hesitated to put that on the bag because that's a flavor note you typically see with coffees like a more traditional Brazil. So you don't want folks to get the wrong idea there of like,
Right.
oh, this is going to be really chocolatey, which it is, but that's sort of like a minority component of this whole big fruit bomb of a coffee, So it's like it's an interesting thing. You
Right.
want to make sure you put the words on the bag that do the best job of letting folks know what to expect, I guess.
So they get the right coffee for themselves, because I mean, we've said that a couple of times, and not every coffee is for every person, and it's about kind of making sure that option is there for you to explore. So I want to make sure before we dive too far into Sidra, which we started doing, that I understand this process. So for sourcing, broad strokes, reach out to a producer, probably with an established relationship, but occasionally a new one. Ask for samples that fit into whatever you're looking for, whether it's a seasonal spot or one of your 5 core lineups. Then you taste those, decide which ones you like or best suit your need. Then after you order that, it comes in, then you do the tasting that has blurple and watermelon and whatever.
Yeah,
Shouting words.
that's more or less it. And to add sort of
boom, I can open up I got it. You guys are in trouble now.
the first thing you mentioned of us reaching out, that is oftentimes the case. But one thing that's really cool about a lot of these relationships we have now is the producers and importing companies know our company and they know what we like, and they get to know our tastes, and a lot of times they'll actually send us a sample and say, hey, I think you'll like this coffee.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of that happening too, which
So
is
the
awesome.
that's where the relationship can also help, just getting exposed to stuff.
And that sort of, when that happens, it's sort of like they're kind of an arm of our business in a sense, where they're helping us do some of the sourcing, because they're like, we have this coffee that we know what you like,
Yeah.
try this. So
Yeah.
And this
Well,
is why it's really important to give feedback to producers and to importers, so you can let them know what you thought of coffees, even if you're rejecting them. So you can say, "This is where we're not going to buy this one, and this is why we're not going to buy them." And as they get to know you, they maybe next time they won't even send you, or they'll say, "Hey, we do have this one, but I don't know if it's right for you." So
yeah.
it's
Well,
nice
and
to
that,
those relationships are good to foster with, and that's one of the reasons it's nice to work with people year over year, because they understand who we are and we understand who they are. So it's great. It's also fun to meet new people. You can mingle.
Well, and there's totally different sizes of importers as well, with different ranges of coffees, and there are definitely some who we tend to lean on more for certain origins. And I mean, Sophia, who we had on from Unblended with Andres Cardona, a couple episodes ago, is a great example. Like Unblended, if we are looking for fruity Colombian coffee, something really interesting, they, and then Forrest, who we brought in the Sidra Genius through, are two relatively new and relatively small importers, but are really really good at bringing us coffees like the Sidra and like the La Ilusión and some of
Fantastic
these other,
coffees.
just incredible, right? Um, so it's been really cool to do that. Or we worked with somebody else who, I mean, just started his company a year and change ago, and we've brought in some really really wacky coffees that we wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So we love working with them, but at the same time, we can't go to them for like our core Brazil that we need full shipping containers worth of, and expect to get that from them. So it's good to have all of those relationships, and kind of to Philip's point, for them to know what it is we're looking for. And then, I mean, Taylor hasn't said this, he is up to his eyeballs in samples. Like, we receive
yeah,
a
that's what's
lot
behind
of
you, right? Those are just samples.
Yeah, I have a right to my right is just a gigantic rack of samples, and we try to get to them, like really try to get to them all. And so it's we have to sample roast them and we have to taste them. We taste them all blind, and we try to group them with coffees that aren't gonna give them an unfair chance. So if we're tasting a bunch of like super crazy anaerobic coffees that are gonna have lots of fruit, we don't put a washed Peru on the table and expect that to do well there. So we try to group like coffees, and we taste everything blind, like I always say.
yeah, and so that's a good point too. So like almost all of our tasting does happen blind, so, meaning we know what the 10 coffees on the table are, but we'll mix them. We'll write on the bowl on the underside, and we'll mix them
One
and
is wedge.
taste them blind, because it's pretty fascinating. It's a psychological thing that happens where if you look at what you're drinking, you're going to bring some preconceived idea of what it tastes like. So that's a really important thing we've found, is tasting them blind. And then, making sure that there's not anything on the table that's going to just make everything else taste, like we don't want it. So,
Right. Or it tastes not like everything else, and so it hurts that coffee. Whatever.
yeah,
Go both ways,
totally.
probably.
Yeah,
Because
because in
there's this,
Brazil, on the table of a bunch of anaerobics, you're going to be like, well, that one wasn't good. But if you taste it on just because it doesn't, it's just hard to your brain to take that kind of difference. But and it's just that contrast. And if it's with a bunch of Brazils, like then it's really easy to be like, oh, this one's the best one.
it's like it'd be like expecting orange juice, and then you realize it's milk or something, and you're like, what happened?
That's right. That's right. It is shocking. It
They're
can be
both
shocking.
good.
Well, that's just
Both
a
good
creamsicle.
beverages.
That's delicious. So that's a terrible example.
Well, we work with
Okay,
one
get it.
fellow that he sends us samples that all just have numbers on them, and so we taste them. We don't even know what
You
we're
don't even know.
tasting, and we have
Yeah,
to say,
which
well,
is
we like 3 a lot, and he's like, okay, well, I'll let you know what that is, and
yeah.
that's even more confusing and
Next
interesting
week.
and fun. Yeah, and Taylor's one of the best cuppers for what I've just been he's just a natural at it. We've cupped so many coffees together over the years, and like I feel pretty comfortable cupping, but I'm always really really impressed with cupping with him and him being able to cup something blind and guess something, and me kind of secretly being like, I don't think he's right, and then I'm like, dang it, he was right. He's really good at it.
Well, that's something too,
Yeah.
like because we taste so many coffees together, it'll be a lot of times, Philip and I, and we have Alyssa, who is also has a great palate and is awesome to have in, and then Jaron, who's our production roaster, he's in on most all of them. I
This
think
is
we've
Jaren's mug.
I think we've tasted at this point. We've tasted so many coffees that we've kind of synced up a bit on what we like, and we know, yeah, we kind of know what what each other's tastes are. And I think more often than not, when we point to the favorite, we're kind of, we're on the same page. So
Yeah, if it's not that, it's like these two, and we're like, yeah, and then we argue, okay, I like this one because this, or this one because this. Usually, yeah. But we cupped some fantastic Panamas yesterday, by the way, from a really great second time importer, Creativa, which I think we're really excited about. Whatever number 7 is about to blow some people away. It was one of the craziest coffees I've ever tasted. But back to Sidra.
All right, yeah, that's exactly. So let's go. Let's fine tune it. Bring it home for Sidra Genius. Where does this fit in the lineup? Like, why'd you pick it? I'll let Taylor start.
Yeah, so this is one of those cases where we were booking seasonal coffees, so these coffees outside of our core lineup, and specifically looking for something that would fit that wild kind of really dynamic, crazy end of the spectrum. So sort of what would be that coffee. And yeah, I mean, we tasted it along with several other of Forest's coffees, and it kind of just jumped out as the most dynamic and interesting coffee. And I think some of that I think is due to the varietal itself, which it's a Sidra, which is a little bit of an uncommon varietal, like you don't see too often. So it brings some unique flavors there just from that. But I think more importantly, the processing that they do at El Virgil, which is the farm that it's processed at, is just so. I mean, they get so into the processing and the fermentation science.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that a little bit? You were telling me some before we started recording, so we share.
Yeah, and I just spoke to them so I wouldn't say the wrong thing. But yeah,
someone actually prepared.
We'll just cut this part out. It's too professional.
So the coffee itself isn't grown at El Virgil, which is the farm where it's processed. Okay. It's actually grown at another farm in Colombia called Las Flores. The cherry is then purchased by the folks at El Virgil, where they sort of take it over from there, do all the processing, and everything that from there to get it to us. So it kind of starts with pre-fermentation. So the coffee, after it's picked, it'll sit in grain pro bags, and the fermentation process is already underway during the trip from Las Flores to the farm at El Virgil. So once it arrives, they'll sort it, they'll put it into plastic tanks. So pretty typical of a lot of anaerobic coffees. They'll sit in these big, like, blue plastic tanks. But for this one, they add what's called mosto, like MOSTO, which is essentially the juice that is left over as a byproduct from a previous fermentation. So they'll actually save that juice and they'll reintroduce it to the cherries in this tank.
So this is almost like a sourdough starter kind of situation, where it's like a fermented juice that you're throwing in your coffee to make this.
Yeah.
And even
so I guess that mosto sort of kickstarts the fermentation again. And yeah, he said that they sit it in the tanks for about 3 days, but they measure the pH of it regularly, and it's again really controlled, and they wait till it reaches a certain number. About 3 days, he said. But at that point, they pull it, They dry it in silos that are really controlled. He said there's a really controlled amount of airflow, temperature. They'll kind of adjust it and take readings, and that takes about 22 days. Where at that point they'll let it stabilize for another month. So there's about 2 months of time from the time it's out of the tanks to the time they actually strip the fruit off. And
that was
then
what I was gonna ask. So this is all in the fruit still. It's not been washed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of time spent with the cherry still on. So then they'll mill it, and from that point, that's when they'll send it our way. But his, in talking to Santiago, who's one of the owners at El Virgil, he says that that Masto process, coupled with the really controlled drying process, is what yields most of that really unique, like really fruity flavor you get. And he said there is still a part of it that Sidra varietal is responsible for, like some of the more kind of floral citrus notes. That's sort of a Sidra hallmark, I guess. But most of it being from that like real attention to detail during the processing and the drying and all that.
So this is still considered a washed coffee though, right? So at the end of this is a natural.
Yeah,
I thought I
so
saw in the notes that it was washed. God, who's I also left my podcast reading eyes home. So
yeah, so this is a natural.
That's why it didn't make sense.
You read it.
We are, so from this same producer, we are going to be booking a washed coffee as well soon. So that'll be one that's sort of a little further down that we're going to let folks try. But
importantly, here's something that I think is great information I can add to the podcast. So I'm going to do it now. This coffee was picked on the same table as
The Last Supper.
Tiki Punch.
No.
Tiki Punch was on the same table. We got both of these coffees out of one cupping table. So imagine that cupping session. It was awesome. So that was really great. And it was one of those ones where when we looked at it and we were like, both of these are so good for sort of different reasons, but they're like we couldn't decide. And then when we found out more information, so that after we cup, then we're like, okay, we need to gather all the information about these two. And in gathering those information, there was really a limited supply of Tiki Punch, and there are some other factors that caused us to make Tiki Punch a limited release. Where Sidra, we found out, wow, we can make that a seasonal. They have more of it, and it fits within. So there's other factors that go into what happens after we choose coffees. But
that's
what a fantastic cupping table. There were some really unlucky coffees that were the other coffees that were on the table with those suckers, because they're so good. And there were other really great coffees. I mean, Forest really is. I mean, I haven't really had a coffee that it's like these are outstanding and then these are really, really good.
Was Forest the importer for Tiki Punch as well?
Yeah. But importantly, they were part of the processing of Tiki Punch, similar to this one.
Okay.
It was a Wilder Lazo coffee. They are responsible for finding other farms in their area and helping to both process and then export those from Colombia. So we find this a lot. There's a lot of times farmers that concentrate more on just the growing aspect rather than the processing. And then also Forest, with a name like Sidra Genius and Tiki Punch, they clearly are really also very good at marketing and being fun, and their bags they come in are they really just pay attention to every detail. Also, it is really wonderful to work with the people.
That's what really when I see.
They're young and they're communicative and they're just lots of energy. So it's really easy to find out information and all that stuff. So I'll stop talking now.
No, you're good. You went out for like 2 seconds in the middle, so I was gonna try and fill the gap.
What? What are you doing?
I tried to stop. It's too late. It's coming out of my mouth. Oh man, yeah. Well, that's the Sidra Genius. That's I think the that was one of the things that struck me, is the irony of, the naming of gummy bear being the flavor to not be too hoity-toity, but Sidra Genius is the name of the
It's a really
the
smart gummy bear.
Smart people like gummy bears.
Shout out to
Maybe.
Hairbo.
I don't know. Yeah. Anything else you guys wanted to talk about here before we discuss brewing? Anything important that was left out? All right. So
there probably is, but I don't know.
So Alan, how do we brew the perfect cup of Sidra Genius?
Yeah, so this is one that I've gotten to play with a lot now, brewing, and I'm actually super excited. So we put together an automated email with like all the brew tips for this coffee, that anytime someone buys a bag of it 4 days later, so kind of as the coffee is showing up at their door, they should be receiving an email with all the brew tips for it. So that's kind of been a fun process. But this is a coffee that is really sensitive to modulation in either grind size or steep time. Those kind of work in the same way. And it's one that if you push it too far, so if you grind too fine or you steep it too long, like it's still a nice cup of coffee, but you lose a lot of that big, red pinkish flavor, and it kind of goes flat. It's just a sweet coffee flavored coffee. But as you go a little bit coarser with the grind or faster with the steep time, you find those red gummy bears and lots of sweetness. And then if you back off even further, so go even coarser with it or shorter on the time, it starts to trend a little bit more acidic, a little brighter, and you get to that watermelon Jolly Rancher. And it's fun to play with this coffee too, because depending on your mood, like you can get a very different cup out of it. And then likewise, it does well in every brew method I've tried it in. It really does. I really like an AeroPress of it, where it's like a nice full body round cup, and you get more of that like heavy red flavor. The Clever is a really good way to do this modulation, because you're just changing how long you steep it. But then I also really enjoyed V60 cups of it. So it ends up with a lighter body, and it's almost like red Kool-Aid is what it reminded me of, where it's just that like really sweet, really clean, and it's almost an artificial red candy-ish flavor still. It's so good. So
One of these days we're gonna have to dive into this, like this Alan formula of flavors. The flavor formula. I don't know what we're gonna call it.
What about espresso, Alan? What did you find on espresso?
Yeah, so I will say I expected it to flow faster than it does. So typically, and I don't ask me for the entire mechanism on this, but typically anaerobic coffees and Colombian anaerobic coffees especially tend to flow really fast on espresso. Like you really have to grind pretty fine for them. And that's really not the case on this one. Typically with those faster flows too, you end up with a really long ratio, like a 3-to-1. Like you're just accepting a long ratio because the flow rate's so fast, you just can't grind fine enough. With this, you can kind of just do like middle of the road almost on both grind and ratio. So like a 2.5-to-1 ratio does really nice. I enjoy it as an Americano, where it's kind of the same cup as an AeroPress. You get that full body and a lot of that just like rich red sweet cup. It's really good. I don't recommend against it for espresso by any means. It's great.
Awesome. Just for a preview of a wackadoodle flavor note, on the Panama number 7, not to bring this back to the cupping table, the cupping note was Mountain Dew.
Oh man!
So far, we'll see. We'll see if that makes it. No, this is too fresh. Too fresh for. We'll see.
It's accurate.
Yeah,
it's not a lie.
Man.
I'm really excited to taste it. Actually, I thought as a flash, I think just because I'm thinking Mountain Dew would be really nice, or even like and close your ears, Alan. Even an espresso tonic would be really nice with
Mhm.
this one, but
Yeah, but so
Alan
that's
does
what's
not
so
like
fun with this
espresso
too,
tonics.
right? No, well, yeah, I'm not.
He doesn't like
Tonic,
tonic,
it's
so it's
right.
just
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's tonic is quinic acid, right? Which is one of the, if you take a cup of coffee that's been sitting for a little while, like you've already had some breakdown to that, and then you stick it in the microwave, like kind of that unpleasant flavor is quinic acid. Like it's a thing
But
you're fighting.
it also has sugar, so
And
it balances that some. I
I
It's a
guess
taste.
just
I like it.
yeah,
He doesn't like it. We're different.
You say
right.
potato, I say potato.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's not my favorite, but I'm happy for other people to drink it. But
There you go.
well, and I guess to exactly that point though, right? Is even that coffee or some, I mean, I actually just had yesterday morning, I made my very last 16 grams of the whatever 2 limited release ago Columbia, the Gesha spirits, which is a really, really interesting coffee. Like I've never had a coffee that tastes like Fruit Loops, like the actual cereal Fruit Loops before. It is, that coffee has lasted me 6 months though, because it's not one that I want to reach for
Yeah.
on a regular basis. And some of the coffee, like we talked about the potential of a licorice taste, flavor coffee. Like there is something to be said for just finding something interesting in coffee, because there's functional coffee, and if that's all you're looking for, I mean, even the Legender is more than you need in your life, right? Like there are plenty of functional coffees out there, but if you're looking for an experience, sometimes it is tasting something you're like, this isn't my favorite, but holy crap, like this tastes like licorice, like so
Yeah.
incredible. And that's what makes coffee really fun. And then on my extra nerdy end, being able to play with these coffees and modulate, okay, so maybe it tastes like licorice, but what happens if I grind it a little bit finer, or I run a little bit longer ratio, and like how can I morph that? Or, and I know some people, would be surprised to hear us say this, like some coffees just do better with milk, or they do better in a latte, or I, most of the coffees we source are so sweet. Like I've never met one where I'm like, oh, this needs sugar in it. Um, but like the Mexico that we have right now, I don't know if it's better with milk, but it sure as hell isn't hurt by it.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a
Or
good.
the
I love the Mexico.
I was
yeah,
going to say to take that thought a step back. There's also before it gets to being brewed, there's things we can do in the roast to modulate flavors. So there's a lot of times when we're dialing in the roast of a coffee, we'll roast it 5 different ways in the Loring, and a lot of times 2 or 3 of them are good, but it's kind of a matter of opinion. It's a matter of what flavors we like more out of the coffee. So, there's lots of times, you can roast it a bit faster and more intense flame, and maybe you get a little more brightness, a little more acidity. You slow down the roast, maybe you bring out some more of the sweeter notes, and one isn't right or wrong, but it's kind of a matter of like, where do we want it to sit? How do we want to present it?
I I'm instantly thinking of the guava banana, right? Like, so this was a coffee that we had from same processing station, and it was, so we had like the first, I guess the first final ish roast of it that was, I mean, it was super interesting coffee, but it was really intense, like really, really. I did not want to finish a cup of it, and if I
That's
mean, we were going to put it on bar, and there's no question it was going to curdle any milk that touched it, and uh, and then Taylor went 2 degrees darker, so
yeah.
which is
Well,
a,
even
I
one, it
mean,
might have just been one, like
well, the
a
final
degree
was
for,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it
true.
went 2 degrees darker, and it was like, it was still good, but then it was kind of flat. Like it lost so much of the flavor clarity that you had, where it was like, this is passion fruit. And then and then it ended up being literally that 1 degree difference in the middle, where it was just like this amazing balance of super intense. It may not be your everyday coffee, but you're going to finish the whole cup of it, and it's sweet, and it held up to, oh, that coffee was incredible.
Yeah, the
But
sweetness ended up balanced. It got more in balance, which is what we're looking for. We want to have those wild and crazy flavors, but sweetness and balance is also, something we're after as well.
right, it's just
And
such a
I love
testament to
it's so cool to have tools that where you're, when we first started off, to bring it way back when and Taylor and I were in a room with the 12 kilo, and it was definitely not not dialed in as as close as much as it is now. So it's pretty neat, and we have some more tools on the way in the next month to help us be able to do that more efficiently. And so it's been great to be able to grow. Taylor mentioned having more tools and the company growing. One of the things that's been really great, obviously having been there from when it was just me and a bike, is to bring on people that are obviously fantastic, like all of y'all and everyone that we work with. Probably the biggest component. But the other thing is that we're all in agreement that we're still like none of what the idea of trying to make things great and present find great coffees, and that has preserved, and that's been the most important through line since the beginning. And so it's awesome to be able to see what Taylor and obviously the folks at Forest. I mean, when we started off, we didn't have those kind of relationships, so it's been great to see how, and coffees like these. um I mean, do you remember? I think it was the Guatemala Liminar, I think, was a
Mhm.
coffee what early on, where we got, and we tried a really fast, really light roast of it. And I think you and me and Spencer were like, whoa, like, and we brewed it as we were like brewed it all these ways. And I think that was one of the early on, just one of those coffees where we're like, we got to keep trying to find
Yeah.
coffees, like the sourcing bit, and the really kind of digging into, not just because we knew two great places to get coffee from. That was enough to there were there's more out there, and everyone in the whole industry has sort of uh, gotten better and better. So it's pretty neat. It's interesting to see what's coming. Hopefully the environment holds out on us, but we'll see what happens.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I do want to add even more just context. What I said 1 degree. Like for anyone who doesn't roast coffee, which I imagine is most of us, right? Yeah, that's 1 degree out of over 400.
Right.
So this is a quarter of a percent difference, and it was, I mean, it dramatically impacted the end state. And
Mhm.
I mean that is a testament to, I mean, to Taylor and his ability to make those small changes and really seek out that best possible coffee. Um, but also, I mean, just when we know a quarter of a percent can drive a huge change in a coffee, thinking about all the way back to the that wasn't a was that a Wilder coffee? I don't remember.
Which
Um,
one? Oh, guava
the
banana.
guava banana. Yeah, but all
I
the way
don't
back,
Well,
like,
remember.
that was one that was
No.
grown at El Virgil, actually.
Right,
okay.
That
right.
was one of
That's right.
theirs.
I thought so.
And so, I mean, everything from, I mean, imagine a quarter of a percent difference in when those coffees were picked, or how long they stayed in the fermentation
Yeah.
tanks, or how long they were dried, or a quarter of a percent difference in, the moisture level in the bean before they actually packed it up into the final bags and sent it to
Mhm.
us, or you know,
Yeah.
I guarantee you I'm not brewing it within a quarter of a percent of the
Standard
prescribed time.
deviation isn't a quarter percent.
Well,
Yeah.
typically we think about 2 degrees is where we start noticing differences,
Yeah.
which is why he tried two first. But it's pretty. Yeah, I mean, most folks that we talk with would, especially, well, most folks will tell you 1 degree won't make a difference. But I, I, I
Depends
mean,
which degree.
Yeah.
But
we
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
we,
and then
we noticed one.
particularly particularly with when we're pulling coffees, like roasting on the lighter side, when the development phase of the roast starts, it's so those every half a degree or 1 degree is a really significant difference.
Right. It's about where you're
after the
hitting
coffee.
like flash points or melting points of different chemicals inside, I would guess.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
Like
from the
chemistry side.
time, yeah. So from the time first crack starts to when we're pulling, or I should say, dropping the coffee into the cooling tray, that's a really volatile time where you get a whole spectrum of flavors that
Sure.
that sort of come out. So deciding when in that window we want to dump the coffee is really important. So
All right.
Well,
So
we could
many
have a
variables.
in
separate.
my
I feel
relationship
like
with this coffee, I'll never dump it.
we,
Sorry.
All right.
I
So
feel like we could have a
Some
separate.
terrible joke.
yeah, I think we did have 2 episodes just now.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could have a separate episode just talking about roasting theory,
Yeah.
or like how we think about that. I think. But
I love it. I love learning all these different like the science principles that are happening behind the scenes. That I mean, a lot of it is stuff that I don't have any control over before it gets to me, right? But it's still interesting, and that's like the brewing thing. Someday I'd like to have an episode talking about that too, just because that's like the one thing I can control. Although not really, because I don't have the same equipment that Alan has at his house. But
Well, you're forced to control it in some way,
yeah,
and this
yeah,
is something
that's
that I
true.
talk about a lot. Is one of the things I love about coffee. Obviously, there's a lot of different flavor components that's happening, especially when you're talking about it as opposed to chocolate and wine, which are also really complex
Yeah.
flavors, really great things to eat or drink. But the consumer or everyone in the process has to make decisions. They have
Yeah.
to figure out what quality of water do you use? How hot do you make it? What does the grind look like? How do you store it? All of these things are pretty volatile decision making. And until someone actually puts their lips to a cup and drinks it, even Alan even talked to someone the other day who was like, he had to say, like, let the coffee cool a little bit before you drink it, which was
Totally.
and they were like, oh my gosh, it was way better. It was a really one of the more interesting. He was like trying to solve a problem, and he was like, they're drinking it way too hot. But there's
melting all their taste buds off.
That's
before
right.
they
I
have
think
it.
they're hurting themselves.
I only drink it at 2:05.
But I find that's what connects all of us, and I think that's interesting from the very first, sprouts of a coffee seed and at the farm and the soil and the rainfall and the altitude to the final sip. We're all connected, and I think that's one of the things that makes coffee truly special.
Awesome. All right. So if anybody wants
Is
to
he
get
done?
a Sidra Genius, is he done? Is he done expanding?
He's never gonna
I
stop.
think he's done.
He's
All right,
had
I'm
too
just
much
gonna
coffee.
mute Philip real quick.
Someone spray him with a hose.
Sidra Genius. It's seasonal. How long is it in stock? Taylor.
We'll have it a couple more months. So
Okay.
we've
All right,
got.
so
There was kind of a limited amount, but we've got a little bit left. So
awesome. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, whether listening or viewing, and we will see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
all right.